Thank you very much, Paolo, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this really fascinating, interesting conference. You say the Competition Commission does a lot of this type of work. I think going to something Tommaso said, the Competition Commission has paid for a lot of this type of work and has done a little bit of it itself, and that's one of the things that I'm going to talk about today. So here's a sort of brief introduction to why we do or commission ex post evaluation at the CC. I'll talk a bit about that. I'll then run through some examples of what we've actually done and the methodologies that have been applied in those examples and what lessons we've learned. I should say what lessons, what we've been told we should learn rather than necessarily lessons we have learned, but let's see when we get to that. I'll then briefly discuss what determines our choice of methodology for carrying out an evaluation and how we internalise what does come out of the evaluations in the organisation. What I won't be discussing today are the studies that Martin Cave mentioned yesterday, the evaluations of remedies, which is another programme of work. Nor will I really be focusing on our internal end of inquiry reviews, which are a systematic exercise that we undertake after every investigation to see what we internally can take from what's gone on in the investigation. So, starting with why we do ex post evaluation. Obviously, Tommaso and Dan have both given some important reasons why this sort of exercise is useful and important. I might say that probably our aims are a little more modest than some of the sort of evaluating the whole contribution of merger policy to the economy or things like that. Basically, we do it to try and learn lessons about the way in which we've analysed issues in the past, which we could then use to improve the way we approach things in the future. So, more specifically, when we look at markets where mergers have been cleared, it allows us, first of all, to test the belief that we obviously had that the merger wouldn't substantially lessen competition. So are we being too kind with our intervention threshold? If there is no substantial if we observe no substantial lessening of competition, it allows us to test whether that has arisen for the reasons that we envisaged or whether it's for some other reason. And if it turns out that actually competition has been impeded by the merger, it allows an examination of how quickly market participants respond to this and whether it's just a temporary blip, if you like. More generally, we can learn a bit more about how markets respond to significant increases in concentration. By far the bulk of our ex post evaluations have focused on markets where the merger has been cleared. We have also done a few studies of markets where mergers were blocked. And in that case, you can still assess whether some of the predicted market developments actually arise. So I'm now going to run through the different evaluations that we've conducted and what we've been told to learn from each of those. So here's a list of the studies that are all on our website. First of all, PwC did a study of 10 cleared mergers in 2005. We published in 2008, and this sort of goes a bit to something Dan said, a study that took about 3 years to finish by CC staff economists of 4 cases, including 3 mergers. Then in 2009, there was a study of 8 merger decisions, and this is where we've got some conditional clearances, unconditional clearances, and prohibitions. And these are both phase 1 and phase 2 cases. And that was carried out by Deloitte and Steve, who probably knows more about it than I do. And then finally, we've got the study that Tommaso spoke about earlier of the 2 cleared retail mergers that was carried out by Lear in 2011. I've put at the bottom, this isn't a typo, there's the 2013-14 study of what, carried out by whom, and that's because we do very much intend to spend more thousands of pounds later this year. So Tommaso, if you're interested in getting hold of some more useful data to carry out a further study on mergers to yet be decided. So, starting with the PwC report in 2005, this was a detailed study of 10 of the 29 cases that the CC cleared without remedies during the period 91 to 2002. It was conducted on the basis of case studies and interviews, and primarily interviews on the views of the customers of the merging parties. What PwC found was that basically the competitive constraints that seemed to be binding on the parties post-merger were very similar to those that had been identified by the Competition Commission when it cleared the merger. In particular, and remember this because this somewhat contradicts something that happens in a couple of slides' time, the CC appears to have generally a good record at predicting where entry is likely to act as a significant competitive constraint. Where they said that the Commission appeared to have found more difficulties were in predicting the circumstances where buyer power was likely to act as a significant constraint. So then there was the study that was done internally of just 3 merger cases, 2 prohibitions and 1 clearance. And these cases were selected on the basis, A, that they hadn't been covered by PwC, and B, that they raised some complex issues that might be worth thinking about and learning lessons from. These, again, were conducted primarily on the basis of interviews with market participants and also with some fairly high-level desk research. This study concluded that the decisions were basically sound, although market developments weren't necessarily exactly what had been anticipated by the Commission. It wasn't clear that the difference in what had occurred would have led to a different decision having been made. Some other lessons that we thought we should learn from this was these merger decisions took place just before the CC had any published guidelines. And they thought some of the way things were presented and expressed demonstrated the potential benefits of having such guidelines. An example was that some of the discussion of vertical issues was a little bit muddy and could have been a bit clearer. There could have been a better distinction in one of the cases between whether we were talking about unilateral or coordinated effects. I mean, that sort of resonates a bit with something Joe was mentioning in his presentation yesterday. But here I think there was just it just wasn't clear what we were talking about. And finally, whether in one case there could have been more focused consideration of the merger-specific effects, the delta, what impact was the merger having on competition, rather than an examination of the state of competition in the market. So I refer you back to my previous discussion on PwC, but in 2009, Deloitte conducted a review for us, and Steve also did some work as part of this review. This was a study of 8 merger cases, a mixture of clearances and prohibitions, And here the cases were selected so that we had a range of analytical issues and a range of industries. I'm not sure how we could have avoided having a range of industries because we don't get that many cases in any given industry. Again, this was conducted primarily through interviews with some desk research. There are also some written questionnaires sent out in this case. And then there was a separate element of the study, which was a simple merger simulation exercise that Steve carried out, where he assessed the implicit modelling and data collection by the agency based on the information available at the time of the merger. He ran a very simple merger simulation to see whether it would have, whether it came up with similar answers. So here, Deloitte thought that there was some suggestion that there may have been a tendency to overstate barriers to entry and expansion in early CC decisions under the Enterprise Act. So I think there were 5 cases that were, 5 CC cases that were considered, and in 3 of those there was some unforeseen entry that happened after the decision had been taken. Another point they made was that in retail mergers, the differences in choice of geographic market definition and intervention threshold, so whether you thought 4-3 was a problem or 3-2 was a problem, could have been more clearly explained. And they also they highlighted some potential inconsistency on whether you include in-house supply in the relevant market or not, so whether the product that is being used by the company as opposed to putting it out on the open market should be included in the analysis. Steve's merger simulation exercise suggested that analysis was generally consistent, coherent and transparent, but there was some question as to whether the authorities had always collected the right data. So whether we were really sufficiently clear on the sort of elasticities and margins that underpinned the simulations that should inform the decisions that we make. So the final report that we've had is the one that Tommaso has already spoken about. This was the Lear report of 2 CC mergers, both in the retail sector, as well as the books merger that Tommaso explained earlier. There was also a study of Game Station, who that was a merger between two retailers of video games. As Tommaso explained, this employed a difference in difference analysis, supplemented by a survey of market participants. So this was the first time we'd really gone quantitative in our ex post evaluation. I think generally, broadly, the Lear analysis supported the clearance decision in both cases. But interestingly, even with the thousands of pounds that we were able to provide, thousands of pounds worth of data that we were able to provide, it wasn't enough. It would have been nice to have more data on quality variables and how things were varying on dimensions other than price, for example. And this is a real problem when we're trying to conduct these ex post evaluations. Dan was talking about subpoenaing information. We just can't do that for this work. So we're relying on goodwill and lots of money, basically, to get the data. And even there, I don't think we end up with nearly as rich a data set. So, moving on, what determines our choice of methodology? Should we look at clearances or prohibitions? I think it's fairly clear that it's easier to evaluate the authorities' predictions about the development of the market in clearances and see whether we've been whether we've been too lenient or not. But there is a sort of sample selection bias here. What we're not able to see if we only look at clearances is whether we've been too interventionist. You need to look at blocked mergers to understand that. Another question is whether we should look at cases that occurred in the recent past or whether we should allow more time to elapse. And here there's a balance to be struck. You do need enough time since the decision to collect relevant information so that there's been some impact of the decision. But if you allow too long, it's arguably harder to isolate the impact of the decision from other developments in the market. Should we use qualitative or quantitative methodologies? Some questions are undoubtedly better answered quantitatively if you have the information, and that just goes back to the point I just made. And finally, should we do this? Should we be buying in this work, or should we be doing it in-house? And I definitely took on board Dan's point that, you know, this is a way of developing expertise in-house. Conducting the work is useful training. However, I think, I'm not saying we're busier than the FTC, but we certainly don't have any resources to devote to this at the moment. And so really, it's just not an option for us at the moment to do it in-house. So we really are going out for this work. And one possible advantage to going out to get the expertise from outside is that people might think they are more likely to take a balanced view of whether the Commission has made a right or wrong decision in the past. So finally, just a quick word about how we take forward what we have learnt from these evaluations. First of all, we're very transparent about this. We've published all of the reports in full, which allows both internal and external stakeholders to benefit from their findings and the methodology that we've used. And we have a steering group at the Competition Commission who A, ensure that the evaluations take place regularly, and B, that the findings are disseminated. And certainly some of these evaluations have played an important role when we've been revising and drafting guidelines. They've sort of pointed to areas which would be useful to focus upon and to think hard about. And we also hold internal seminars when these reports have been completed in order to discuss and present the findings and the implications. And these findings certainly don't stand alone. They complement issues that arise from our internal navel gazing, I suppose, and the end of inquiry reviews that I mentioned earlier, which systematically occur shortly after we've completed every single investigation. So that's really it. If you want to read any of these reports, they're all at that link on our website. Thank you.